The Holy Gospel according to Luke. He came down with them and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And everyone in the crowd was trying to touch him, for power came out from him and healed all of them. Then he looked up at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice on that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven, for that is how their ancestors treated the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets." The Gospel of the Lord. Luke's Gospel tells us that the teachings Jesus was about to deliver took place at a level place. That level place could be a plateau in the hill country or even a low place where he was. It notes that people came from the Jewish population centers like Judea and especially Jerusalem, but also from the coastal land, the cities like Sidon and Tyre. Sidon and Tyre were not Jewish cities, so to speak, but there was a strong Jewish population in those cities of Phoenicia. Sounding much like the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, Jesus then gives them a series of blessings and woes. Now, this was a lot like the recitation of blessings and woes that the ancient Israelites used to recite yearly, as we find in Deuteronomy. Every year, half the tribes would be on one ridge, facing the remaining tribes on the other ridge, and they would echo back and forth these blessings and woes as it rang through the valley. Now, Jesus is saying that he's got a whole new set of blessings and woes, something new for the people to consider. The first line is the blessing for the poor. Now, the poor were often associated with those who were pious, for those whose first concern was following the precepts of God. Now, poor and pious, actually, the same Aramaic word stands behind both of those expressions. To follow a life of piety was to be poor in spirit. For those who lived such a life, to them belonged the kingdom of God. And in the biblical languages, the word we translate into English as kingdom usually meant reign or rule or authority. Jewish people recognized that God reigned as king over the world that God had created. Some believed that they were affirming this whenever they recited the Shema, which is found in Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. In that statement, they were acknowledging that there was just one true God, or at least that there was only one God that they were going to worship, and that was Yahweh. But while Jewish people acknowledged God's present rule, most also looked for God's unchallenged reign in the age to come. Many prayed regularly for God's future kingdom, for God to reign unopposed, to fulfill God's purpose of justice and peace in the world. One prayer that came to be prayed daily was known as the Kaddish, which in its ancient form began, exalted and hallowed be the great name, and then concluded with, may he cause his kingdom to reign. By Jesus' time, many were familiar with the book of Daniel and the four kingdoms that are depicted there. Many Jews had come to believe that the fourth and final kingdom was the current Roman Empire. They believed that in the time of the fourth kingdom, God would establish an eternal kingdom, overthrowing the other ones. This kingdom belonged to one who was, quote unquote, likened to the Son of Man, whose rule was associated with the deliverance of God's people and contrasted with the preceding empires that were compared with beasts. Daniel spoke of this as mysteries. So it's not surprising that the Jewish people in the Gospels would speak of these secrets or the secret of the kingdom. Jesus' first followers in the New Testament, who believed that the coming Messianic king had already come once, and that the first fruits of the future resurrection had already occurred, often treated the future kingdom as also present. Much like the stories of King Arthur, where he referred to as the once and future king. This heavenly kingdom had already inserted itself into this world, but it remained yet to be completed. The gospel according to Matthew uses kingdom of heaven with only a few exceptions. And this Jewish expression, it often appears elsewhere and reflects the Jewish use of heaven at times as a respectful, taking a step back, roundabout way of saying God. When they would say heaven, they were referring to God. Then beginning in verse 21, it shows the Jewish expectation of a reversal of our current status in the time of the end, when the lowly would be exalted, the hungry would be filled, and those who weep would laugh. That had been expressed in the Hebrew Bible in Isaiah chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. And blessed are you when people hate you, exclude you, revile you, or defame you on the account of the Son of Man. Jewish people often spoke of suffering for God's name, but here Jesus is saying it is suffering because of himself. And he takes the Son of Man as a description of himself. Then come the woes. The woes to those who are rich, or those who are satisfied now, or those who are laughing now, when they enjoy great reputation now, because they're enjoying the benefits of what their ancestors had said to the false prophets. Those who are mistreated now are treated like the ancient prophets had been treated. Those who were treated well now are in the place of the false prophets. Those whose promised blessing, even when a nation merited judgment, were often more popular than the true prophets, like in 1 Kings 22. Some of the ancient thinkers, like Jeremiah, they advocated for non-resistance against invading empires like that of Nebuchadnezzar. Many times it was on the grounds of saying that anything that's taken away from us doesn't really matter. Anything that can be taken away maybe should be taken away. Some of the Jewish prophets advocated non-resistance because of their confidence in God's ultimate vindication. And Jesus agrees with God's ultimate vindication. But his words go even deeper than simple non-retaliation. And that is to love one's enemies. But we're not to look at ourselves now and say that I'm enjoying a good job. I have a good paycheck. And so I'm going to be in trouble. No, it's not saying that. We're not to say, I'm not going hungry now, so I must be like one of the false prophets. We're not to say that people like me, and so something must be wrong with my spiritual walk. We're not to worry when we enjoy those blessings. But if those things become our sole focus, the things we strive for, then we should be worried and should look to reevaluate our goals and our spiritual walk. I want to tell you a story. Now, the Pope enjoys great ecclesiastical authority, and he doesn't hunger, but that's not his goal. The greater popes have always used their authority and their station to better the lives of others. A certain priest was scheduled to have a private audience with Pope John Paul II. On the appointed day, the priest decided to stop in a basilica on his way to say a quick prayer. On the steps of the church, he thought that he recognized one of the beggars out there. After he entered the sanctuary, he knelt down to pray, and then it hit him. The priest jumps up and he rushes out and he approaches the beggar. I know you. Didn't we go to seminary together? The man gave a nod. So you're a priest then, he said to the beggar. The man replied, not anymore. He said that he had crashed and burned in his vocation as a priest. Please leave me alone, the beggar said. The priest was mindful of his approaching appointment with the Pope. And he said, I've got to go. I'll pray for you. And the beggar's reply, as ours might be, a lot of good that'll do. Now, a private meeting with the Pope is very formal and it's really not very private. There are a number of people who have been granted a private audience at the same time. And when the Holy Father makes his way towards you, the secretary hands him a blessed rosary, and the Pope, in turn, hands this rosary to you. At this point, one would probably kiss the Pope's ring and say something heartfelt. I don't know. I've never done it. However, as Pope John Paul II approached, the priest gave in to a holy impulse. He got down on his knees and he begged the Pope, please, Holy Father, pray for this certain man. I went to seminary with him and now he's a beggar. He is lost. Please pray for him. The priest then tells the Pope the entire story. And the Holy Father looked concerned and he assured the priest that he would pray for his friend. As he moved on, the Pope said something to his aide. And later that day, the priest was contacted by the Vatican. They told the priest that he and the beggar, the former priest, were invited to see the Pope for dinner, to join him for dinner. Well, all excited, the priest rushed back to the church where he saw his classmate. And only a few beggars were left there, but as grace would have it, his former classmate was there among them. He approached the man and he said, I have been to see the Pope. And he said that he would pray for you. And there's more. He has invited us to his private residence for dinner. Impossible, said the man. Look at me. I'm a mess. I haven't showered in a long time and my clothes. The priest said, I have a hotel room where you can shower and shave, and I have clothes that you can wear. Again, by God's grace, the beggar priest agreed. The Pope's hospitality, of course, was wonderful. At the close of dinner, the Pope's secretary whispered to the priest, "He wants you and I to leave." At which point, the priest and the secretary left the Holy Father alone with the beggar. After quite some time, the beggar emerged from the room in tears. "What happened in there?" asked his friend, the priest. And the most remarkable reply came. I'll try to make it through this. He said, "The Pope asked me to hear his confession." After he regained his composure, being obviously choked up, the man continued, "I told him, 'Your Holiness, look at me. I'm a beggar. I'm not a priest.' The Pope looked at me and said, 'My son, once a priest, always a priest. And who among us is not a beggar? I too come before the Lord as a beggar, asking for forgiveness for my sins.' I told him I wasn't in good standing with the church," the beggar priest says. "And he assured me that as the Bishop of Rome, he could reinstate me right then, right there." The man said that it's been so long since he had heard a confession that the Pope actually had to help him through the words of absolution. The priest friend then asked, "But you were in there for a long time. Surely the Pope's confession didn't last that long." "No," said his friend, "but after I heard his confession, I asked him to hear mine." And the final words that were spoken by Pope John Paul II to this prodigal son who came in the form, came in the form of a commission to him. When the new priest was invited uh, uh, back in from the hallway with his friend, the priest who had found him, the Pope said, "Where did you find him?" asking the first priest. "Where did you find him?" And the priest told him, "I found him at this church." And then the Pope turns to the beggar priest, the newly reinstated priest, and he says, "For your first pastoral assignment, I want you to go to the pastor there and report for duty, because you will be an associate priest there with a special outreach for your fellow beggars." And that's where he is today, fulfilling that priestly role of ministering to the homeless and the beggars on the very steps of the very church where his friend had found him. We may enjoy wealth, we may enjoy prosperity, we may enjoy good reputation, but Luther was right. In his last words, he said, "We are beggars." It is true. Thanks be to God.